This just in, the Supreme Court has now handed the president a huge victory on border security, hopefully a harbinger of victories to come, as the Supreme Court today endorsed the U.S. government's authority to detain immigrants awaiting deportation anytime, even years after they have completed prison terms for criminal convictions. Now, the decision handed the president a victory as he pursues his border security agenda. Writing for the majority, Sam Alito said that it is not the court's job to impose a time limit for when immigrants can be detained after serving a prison sentence. And he noted that the court has previously said that an official's crucial duties are better carried out late than never. And he said the challenger's assertion that immigrants had to be detained within 24 hours, ending their prison sentence, was especially hard to swallow. It was a 5-4 vote. Conservative justices also were in the majority in June when the court upheld a 5-4 vote on Trump's travel ban, targeting people from countries that have a population of extremists. Other stats today. Even fake news CNN, 7 in 10 Americans say the economy is in good shape. Interesting. But the liberals are mad today that Trump donated $100,000 to the Department of Homeland Security. Half of Americans now agree that Muller's investigation has become a witch hunt. The biggest accomplishment, by the way, of the president is the deregulation. And then I gave you the numbers before that, in fact, America has now set to become the world's largest oil exporter. Paris-based International Energy Agency notes that the U.S. has become the world's top oil producer in 2018 and is now set to become the world's biggest oil exporter over the next 5 years, surpassing Russia and even Saudi Arabia as an exporter. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. You know, you don't hear, if you turn on the news a lot, about the president's successes, and there are an awful lot of them. You chronicle them in your book. How are you?
Well, I'm great, and I think if you'll notice that maybe I'm too optimistic. You know, I always have this trait. But
here we go, by the way. I'm being set up here. Go ahead.
No. I'm just beginning to think, based on a couple of talks I had with reporters today, and your CNN report just now, maybe the dam is beginning to break. Maybe the facts are so overwhelming that even the hardcore news media is a little shaken that their version didn't work. And, of course, you just had, as you pointed out, 2 historic Supreme Court decisions. Remember, the Hillary Clinton one, those would both have been 7-3 or 7-2 on the other side.
Did you hear what Ted Koppel said? He actually went on to say that he said that the New York Times and Washington Post have both decided as organizations that President Trump is bad for America. He goes on, I'm terribly concerned when you talk about the New York Times these days, when you talk about the Washington Post these days. We're not talking about the Times of 50 years ago or the Post 50 years ago. He said, we are talking about organizations that I believe have, in fact, decided as organizations that Donald Trump is bad for America. Pretty accurate.
Well, that's another great example, though. Here is one of the most respected newsmen of his generation coming down.
Well, I'm still pissed off at him, but go ahead.
Judgment.
Well, he sandbagged me. I do an hour interview with him, and he uses 1 minute and 7 seconds to make himself look good. But anyway, that's edited fake news.
Yeah, you're right. No. Look, I am not going to defend Ted Koppel sandbagging you. It was probably a bad week. He needed to feel good. What can I tell you? But I think it's interesting.
Beat up Hannity.
Even a guy like Ted Koppel, feels that he needs to speak out, you're just sensing that the solid wall that condemned Trump is beginning to have leaks in it. And that's, and of course, the economy is a big piece of that. But also, I had a conversation with a reporter today about the Muller report, in which, and this was a pretty liberal reporter for a pretty liberal paper, who just sort of said, well, gosh, if it really doesn't show anything, doesn't that kind of indicate the president? And, I mean, this is not a reporter who a year ago could have said those words.
So look at what happened with Beto O'Rourke. You want to talk about media bias or the what are you laughing about?
I'm sorry.
Robert Francis Beto, I call him Bozo O'Rourke. But here's
I always talk about Robert Francis O'Rourke, but my newsletter tomorrow is entitled Bye Bye Beto.
He's in deep trouble. But the reporter entered into agreement with Bozo to delay a story about him being part of a hacking group, the cult of the dead cow, until after he ran against Ted Cruz. He held it for 2 years.
Right. That's well. Look, Beto O'Rourke or Robert Francis O'Rourke, to use his real name, is the Kardashian version of the Kennedys. So if you think about whatever the Kennedys once were in a mythical time, this guy is a shallow, narcissistic irrelevancy who is propped up by the support of a whole bunch of people who look at him and go, oh, my God, he actually waves his arms. I mean, did you see him wave his arms?
Oh, he waves them.
He waved his arms so well. You know, and you have to say to yourself, I mean, this is a guy whose supporters have got to be genuinely dumb.
Well,
he's dumb. They've got to be dumb.
So here's what's emerging with the 2020 candidates, and I'll ask a question about Joe Biden separately. But you have now, even during the birth process, abortion. In other words, as labor has begun, right, you're still allowed to have an abortion. We heard the comments of the governor of Virginia. Well, first we'll deliver the baby and we'll make the baby comfortable, and then the mother will decide whether or not medical attention will be given the baby, which is nothing short of infanticide and murder, but put that aside. But they're also the party that is serious. There's 100 congressmen, senators combined that agree with the new Green Deal to eliminate gas, oil, and we're on the verge of the biggest wealth-producing breakthrough this country has ever had with what I just pointed out about gas and oil. And we'll eliminate that, the lifeblood of our economy, and the combustion engine. And while we're at it, we'll get rid of cars and cows and planes, and we'll give everybody everything for free, and we'll tax corporations at 90% and individuals at least 70%, and then we'll have a wealth tax on top of that.
Right.
How does that work?
Look, well, of course it doesn't work. It works like Venezuela. It works like Zimbabwe. It works like Cuba. I mean, anybody who has lived and looked around at socialism on the planet realizes socialism is power to the government, leads to corruption, ends up depriving everybody except the elite of everything, and is sustained in power, as in Venezuela right this minute, only because the military is the one group that gets goodies. Nobody else in Venezuela gets anything. But Maduro makes sure the military is taken care of because they're the only people left to keep him in power. So when you watch these people talk about glibly being socialist, just realize these are people who absolutely refuse to deal with reality. And they're living a fantasy land, and they want you to join them in their fantasies.
So the people that I talk to, there seems to be, although Bernie is leading in a couple of polls over Joe Biden by a pretty significant margin, but people say, well, Joe Biden probably would be the front runner. And I'm looking at, I don't really necessarily agree with that. Joe Biden is a gaffe machine. He'd first have to run on the failed record of him and Obama, which was a disaster. And I think the comparisons will be so stark that he's going to have a hard time defending that. And then you think of, well, I've come from a slave state, and you think of the other gaffes that, well, you can't work at a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight...
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
You got the first sort of mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook.
And you
you don't know my state was a slave state. My state is a border state. My state is the 8th largest black population in the country. My state is anything from a northeast liberal state.
Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
Can you believe storybook, man? I mean, here you have the first African-American that's articulate and clean. But on top of that, then you've got 8 years of a track record. I don't know if America, I think, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, will be a pretty powerful line if it's Joe Biden.
I've known Joe Biden for a very long time. And Joe Biden is always a good candidate as long as he doesn't run. And I think that he will be a terrific candidate if he doesn't run. And every time he starts to run, he makes no sense.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, if you listen to him for a little while, he can't. His facts are wrong. His syntax is terrible, and his logic is just irrational. And that's why the only 2 times he's run, he collapsed as a candidate. And I think that, frankly, if he runs this time, he'll collapse. He will not be relevant by February of next year.
What do you think about where Mueller is now going? And more importantly, you know, we have been now peeling away the onion these 2 years, and we now know that the Clinton bought and paid for dossier, after they rigged an investigation to not charge somebody that should have been charged, Hillary Clinton. She was the favored candidate. And then she buys this dossier. The dossier is disseminated to the American people as Russian lies to impact the 2016 election. Then it's even used to obtain a FISA warrant against the Trump campaign associates so they can spy on an opposition party candidate in the lead up to an election. And now we're finding out that it was used, the same unverified, uncorroborated, Clinton-paid-for Russian lies were used to bludgeon Trump. And it's the exact opposite of what we've been told by the media. And now all the proof is coming out as they begin to reveal these closed-door sessions and testimony.
Well, all I can say, because I have no secret inside information, watching all of his big guns leave quietly, watching the way the news media, who have pretty good sources, are beginning to get more timid, I'm beginning to think that this report may be an amazing vindication of Trump and may be the most devastating thing ever to happen to the House Democrats, because it may make it clear to the country that any effort to go beyond Mueller is pure, vicious partisanship with no public purpose to it. And I have to tell you, and you and I know, because we talked about this for months, if you had said to me 6 months ago that we'd be at this stage and you'd be having this kind of leaving the stage with a whimper rather than a bang, I don't know that I'd have believed it.
Well, what about the 6 to 8 Democratic committees that have now committed themselves for the next 2 years, not serving the American people, but endless investigations? How does that work for them?
Well, look, I think that Mueller, in fact, may make them an embarrassment and may give Trump the perfect bludgeon to say again and again to the country, look, this guy spent millions of dollars. He brought in the best Democratic lawyers he could find. He had the full power of the federal government. He couldn't find anything because there isn't anything. And I think that may well work to totally discredit the House Democrats in their effort to engage in this kind of investigation.
Oh, it's going to be interesting. So who do you think, if you had to guess today, who do the Democrats nominate to be their candidate this year?
Look, I'm sticking with this on your show for week after week. I believe Kamala Harris will be the nominee. I believe that if you're an African-American woman from California, being from California lets you automatically be crazy, and that takes care of the left wing. She can raise a huge amount of money. Being an African-American woman gives her huge advantages in the primary, and I don't see who's going to knock her out. I mean, you know, I think the one person, if Sanders actually can go the distance, he might get the nomination. That would truly be astonishing. But remember,
but even Kamala buys into this new Green Deal insanity. I don't see the American people buying this.
Look. Well, they're not going. You didn't ask me who I thought would win the general. Trump will win the general. Well, you asked about the Democratic Party nomination, and being crazy in the Democratic Party right now is just a sign that you're a good, loyal Democrat. So I think Kamala Harris is adequately crazy by virtue of being from California, and I think that in the end, if you think about it, while Sanders has a pretty good vote, I think he's about like 28, 29%. This is a guy who has 100% name ID, ran before for president, and is probably at his peak. Well, in the end, somebody's got to get to 51. I mean, the thing that happened with Trump is he kept day by day eliminating his opponents, and one morning he was above 50 in the Republican primaries. And I think she is more likely to get there than I think Sanders or Biden.
All right, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, thanks for being with us.